As Alan mentioned, my name is Ann Bettisworth, and I'm the Deputy Director at the Office of Police Accountability. Thank you for having me here today. This is just a very brief presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about background and context of police accountability, about OPA's role and responsibilities, the OPA complaint process, and then a couple of current events and updates just on what's happening now. Feel free to stop me at any time with questions, or we can do questions at the end. So a little bit of background about accountability system partners in Seattle. Seattle has a fairly complex police accountability system. We have 3 different entities providing police oversight to the Seattle Police Department. So the Seattle Police Department is here on the bottom. They support and deliver public safety services. And then these 3 are the 3 entities that provide oversight. On the far left, I guess that's your left, is OPA. And OPA investigates individual complaints of employee misconduct. In the middle is the CPC, that's the Community Police Commission. And the CPC provides community input on policing and policy reform. So they gather input from the community and filter that back through the system. And then on the right here we have OIG, which is the Office of Inspector General. And the OIG conducts systemic reviews and audits certain OPA functions. So they review SPD, but also give oversight to my office, the Office of Police Accountability. So they make sure that we're doing our job and our investigations according to what we say we're going to do. Police accountability has a long history in Seattle, and it's really grown and changed throughout the years. OPA itself was created, I believe, in 2002, when the first civilian came in and the typical internal affairs, sworn SPD-driven investigations unit was disbanded, and they brought in a civilian to do investigations. In 2010, a group of 30 or 40 community groups filed a letter to the Department of Justice regarding complaints about biased policing and excessive use of force. They asked the Department of Justice if they would investigate and see if there was anything that they could do to change these practices. Now moving to the middle box, in 2012, after the DOJ finished their investigation, the DOJ found that it is true there is a pattern or practice of excessive force and potential for biased policing, and the City of Seattle signed into a settlement agreement, which is basically a legal document to reform practices. They said, okay, we agree that something needs to be done, and with a federal monitor, they started doing consent decree work to reform the processes and bring them back into constitutional policing. In 2017, an ordinance was passed in the city that reformed a lot of accountability processes. It enhanced levels of civilization and specified certain things, put them in writing so that they would no longer be just kind of floating around. So that's the history. In terms of OPA's role and responsibilities, and this is an actual hallway in our office. As I stated earlier, the OPA core function is to investigate allegations of Seattle Police Department employee misconduct. So what that means is that we investigate policy violations. Like when you were in high school, your high school was probably governed by a student handbook. And the student handbook may have said you can't wear a hat in school, and you can't disrespect other students. You can't be late or something like that. That's the same kind of level of policies that we're talking about that the Seattle police officers and Seattle Police Department employees must follow. It's like a student handbook, except for employees. So if a police officer or a Seattle Police Department employee does something that's against those policies or does not meet those policies, then that's potentially misconduct. So that's different, for example, than a criminal violation of law or something that's against the law. Does that distinction make sense to folks? Yes?
Could you share an example of when they might both happen at the same time? A
Sure.
policy violation and like a criminal allegation?
Yes. So let's say that an officer is off duty in Seattle and they get pulled over for driving under the influence of alcohol. That's a criminal allegation, that's a criminal issue, but it's also a policy violation for OPA because in the SPD policy manual, it says that SPD employees must conform with law. So it would be a conformance with law allegation, but we would also have to do what we call a criminal referral, and we don't do the criminal investigations, but we would just investigate whether there was a policy violation. It gets a little complex around criminal issues, but that's hopefully they can be parallel processes.
Thank you.
Sure, good question. And that's a question that took me a long time to be able to explain. So I'm gonna go ahead and pat myself.
I think you explained it great. Thank you.
Okay, so OPA is an independent office that has a hybrid structure. So this is unique. I think that OPA is the only office that does investigations in the country that has on staff both sworn and civilian personnel. That means that OPA has law enforcement officers doing investigations, but we also have non-law enforcement officers doing investigations. That's very unique because of chains of command. It's been challenging to get it in place because everything is governed by collective bargaining agreements with the police officer unions. So right now we are able to have 2 civilian investigators in our office. That is according to the collective bargaining agreement. According to the ordinance, it's supposed to be up to the director to make that determination. So this is where law and contract come into conflict. And in this particular case, the contract supersedes the law, and we only have 2 civilian investigators for that reason. But all of the OPA director and all the leadership and management team are all civilians like myself. And then we have about 26 staff, and we have 9 sergeants, Seattle Police Departments at the sergeant level doing investigations. So OPA is under SPD in the very broad sense, and this was strategic. And I've seen a lot of cases and instances in which organizations like ours are not under the jurisdiction of the broader police department, and they have struggles because of, a lot of this is because of data accessibility. It's very hard to actually get the data that you need to do the full and complete investigations if you don't share a data system. So we have a case management system that we're able to share permissions on and very easily exchange information. In other organizations, even if they have a memorandum of understanding set up, I've heard that the police department can sometimes withhold information or be very challenging with the unions to exchange the information adequately. So we are physically separate from the police department. We are located a couple blocks down and in our own unit. We don't have anyone with uniform on site, but we are under that broad umbrella, but we have our own little island of budget pockets and finances, and we keep fairly separate. I think it works out well. Any questions about this slide or staffing? Yes.
Do you foresee there being more than like 2 investigators on the civilian side? Just
Absolutely.
To provide that oversight from the civilian end?
Yeah, I think it'll continue to grow as each contract is negotiated. Contract negotiations are happening right now, and I think that each one will probably, I have no idea, I'm not involved in that process, but my guess would be that it'll probably start to shift. So the complaint process. Who can make a complaint? pretty much anyone. SPD employees, members of the public, if you had an interaction with SPD, even if you just witnessed the interaction and you are not happy with it, you think that looked like something might have been off. Or we can self-initiate, which means we were sent, sometimes I'll see something on social media and I'll say, oh, and sometimes people might tag us on social media and I'll look at it and say, that doesn't look good. That looks like potential misconduct, and I'll forward it on. And so that would mean that's self-initiated. So really, complaints can come in any way. And we look at each one of them to see if there are plausible allegations of SPD employee misconduct.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
Years ago, I was in a little restaurant in Fremont, and across the street, a man was beating on a woman. And there was a policeman in the same restaurant, and I said to him, do you see that going on over there? And he said, that's her husband. You know, so never mind. Now, would that be misbehavior by the policeman?
Hopefully times have changed.
Gosh.
Kind of
I
like
would think
negligence,
so.
maybe?
What's that?
Like negligence? Or like not intervening?
Yeah.
I'm not sure
I
what
would think
violation
that
it would
might
be
be-
specifically, but.
That might be a policy violation.
He might have known the couple if he knew that they were married.
I think things have probably evolved. I would like to think things have changed. For sure. That's a great question, though. There are 4 ways that you can file a complaint with OPA. We have a web form online on our OPA website. That's the primary way in which we receive complaints. About 60% of our complaints come in that way. You can just email to the OPA inbox. You can give us a call, or you can, in non-COVID times, visit us. We have been closed to the public for in-person complaints taking since COVID. I assume that will change eventually back. We have these, this made in materials. We have little flyers with these to hand out at different events. If anyone is interested in them, we have wonderful materials made to make accessibility happen.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Are your materials translated?
Yes, we have them translated in 6 languages.
Awesome, thank you.
Complaint process overview. This gets a little detailed. Feel free to tell me to move it on or slow it down. Okay, so a contact is received, number 1. The contact may or may not be a complaint. It may just be someone, sometimes we get contacts from people saying, the police response time seems to be really slow these days, and it's not about a particular instance, or it's not a complaint of misconduct. So we evaluate that contact and we determine whether or not it is an allegation of misconduct, and if it is, then we go into number 2, which is intake. And intake is a 30-day period of time under which we do a preliminary investigation. We collect basic evidence, potentially interview the complainant or any witnesses, but it's really to figure out what's going on. Then at 30 days, we're contractually obligated to make what's called the classification determination. And what that basically means is, how is OPA going to process or resolve this complaint? And there are a variety of ways that we can do that. These are the different classification types. Contact log means that it's basically just a contact. There is no actual allegation. It might just be, hey, I don't like you, but it's not, I don't like you because of X. Mediation is an option. It could, mediation is, both people have to be willing to mediate the case. Mediations happen fairly rarely because there's a lot involved to get both sides ready to mediate. Supervisor action means that it's more likely a mistake than misconduct, and maybe something that in a normal workplace, it would be something that your supervisor would talk to you about and just give you a little bit of feedback on and say, you know, maybe maybe don't be 5 minutes late next time or something like that. It's not actually a big policy violation. Rapid adjudication is a newer process whereby the employee admits to wrongdoing and says, I don't want to go through this whole investigation. I'm willing to say I did wrong and go with whatever discipline you feel is appropriate. And then the last one is investigation. And that's a full-blown investigation that generally we have 180 days to conduct. And that happens in about, I'd say 50% of all complaints are classified for investigation. So if it's classified for investigation, then it moves down to the gold box number 4. So this bottom line only occurs if it's classified for investigation. The other types of classifications are resolved in a different way, in a shorter time frame. So if the case goes for investigation, the investigation happens over a few months. As I said, there's 180-day timeline per the collective bargaining agreement. And during that time, we interview the employee named in the complaint, any witness employees, and do any other evidentiary collection, look at use of force reports or body-worn video or anything that might be telling to the investigation. Then the director of the office recommends findings in number 5. He looks at the whole file compiled by the investigator and he writes up basically an opinion. It's kind of like a legal opinion. And it says all the details of the case and whether or not he thinks the allegation occurred or not. And if it's sustained, sustained means yes, this did occur, this allegation occurred, or he thinks the policy allegation should be sustained, and then it leads to a discipline meeting with the chain of command and an HR representative and legal advisor. And then it goes to the chief of police who makes the disciplinary decision. So OPA itself does not impose discipline. The OPA director sits on a committee that tries to come to a consensus and provide a range of discipline options to the chief based on past precedent, other similar cases, the disciplinary record of the employee. But it's not OPA that imposes the discipline. That's a common misconception. We do the research, get the group together, and then they pass that recommendation on to the chief, and the chief of police makes the decision.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
How often would you say the chief does or does not accept the recommendation from OPA?
The chief accepts the recommendation in over 99% of cases.
Okay.
I think this year, well, it's 2022 now, so no cases have been flipped. I think in 2021 there was 1 or 2. There's generally, I'd say, between 0 and 3 per year, and that's out of over 500. So it's fairly rare, but sometimes we'll give the chief a range of discipline. Let's say the range might be a written reprimand to 7 days suspension without pay. And the chief can then choose to just do a written reprimand or to give 7 days. Yes, Alan?
Is 500 cases in a year fairly typical of a city this size? Is it low? Is it high?
It's not apples to apples. Because every accountability organization has a different jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions only look at use of force cases. So there really is no typical, unfortunately.
Well, what is typical for Seattle, at least? Like in a year, 500 is around average?
Yes, I'm just putting together our 2021 annual report right now, so I just looked at this data today, or else I probably would not remember. It's been going down. The trend line is going down. I think over the last 4 years, it looks like stair steps down. And I believe the number of cases in 2021 versus 2020 is definitely lower, but there was a lot of misconduct investigations following the protests in 2020. So that was kind of an anomaly. Good question, though. Any other questions on this? Yes?
Seems to me that the intake time is long.
The 30 days?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that have to happen in that 30 days.
Oh.
There are, the first one, I didn't want to bore you with all the details, but there's another mandatory piece of communication that has to go out if you're named in a complaint. If you're an officer and someone has filed a complaint against you, OPA has to notify you within 5 business days that we've received a complaint against you. So there's just a lot of moving pieces. And then we have to, between 5 days and, leading up to the 30-day notification, which is another piece of correspondence, we have to do all the collection of evidence and it's actually, I'd say 75% of the investigation generally goes on in the first 30 days. So there's a fairly significant investigation that's really the intake. It's more work than the word kind of gives it credit for.
Could be a bigger word.
Yeah. I like preliminary investigation better. I use that a lot.
That's good.
So if the case, I kind of skipped over not sustained at box 5, you go sustained and then you go this route, or you go not sustained. If it's not sustained, you receive the, it's just like nothing really happens. The full report still comes out and explains everything, and then on your disciplinary record it would say, for this officer, it would say there was investigation and that it was unfounded, or there are a variety of options for not sustained. Yes?
During this whole process, so the intake could be up to 30 days and then the classification then moves on. At what point or points is the complainant informed throughout this process?
You guys asked very good questions here that really keep us on our toes. So the complainant is, as soon as you file a complaint, we send them, there's a bounce back that says, we got your complaint, we'll follow up with you as soon as it's logged to give you a case number. So then we follow up and give them that. And then at 30 days, we send the complainant and we let them know how it's going forward. And then this is where we kind of, communication falls off. And technically we don't contact them until the 180-day deadline and with the report. I just ran a project last year called the Complainant Experience Project, and where I did a bunch of research and interviews with past complainants, did surveys, and I found out I wanted to see how we could strengthen our process, how we could make complainants feel more heard, communicate better. And this is what we heard from complainants, is that between the 30-day and the 180-day, there's nothing, and you just feel like no one's paying attention to you. So we are ramping up right now what I'm referring to as kind of a complaint navigator role, where we have someone who can contact the complainant in the interim at certain points throughout between 30 and 180, and they're not going to be able to give them concrete information on the investigation because that's just not possible, but to say, hey, we're here, we're still working on your investigation, again, here's the timeline, can I answer any process questions for you? So I think that will make people whose complaints are getting investigated feel a little bit more grounded and like it's not just off in nowhere land.
Yeah.
Because we have heard that. It's just it's a time consuming.
Yeah.
And we haven't figured out how to operationalize it yet. But it is, we're hiring for this person right now. So, also I wanted to say online, we have an online complaint tracker where you can plug in your case number and look to see where it's at in the process. So that's currently where we've been directing people since we haven't had the capacity to give them individual updates all along, is we say check back at any point. It doesn't give you a whole lot of information, but it gives you basics on where it is in the process. Any other questions on this one? You guys are a sharp crowd. Okay. Whew, we made it. Oh, wait, is that it? That is actually all I have for this particular presentation. We have a lot of materials on our website. We have a Twitter account that I actually do our tweets. I keep them very minimal. It's usually when we're rolling out a big case that has public interest. We also have a YouTube account where we created this after the protests when we were sharing the protest case findings were really challenging for a lot of people to understand. There are these huge documents, and we thought, what's a better way that we could get information out to the public on how this investigation, what it entailed and what we found. So we took snippets of the body-worn video and kind of did a voiceover on the narration and put together these 2-minute clips to show how we came to some of the major findings that we did for the protest cases. That's very time-consuming as well, and we got approved to hire that position. We just haven't we're hoping to do that in more cases going forward. What other questions do you all have? Yes?
Well, after the rioting up on Capitol Hill, when was that, summer before last?
Mm-hmm.
There must have been a lot of complaints. How did you sort that out?
That was a bit chaotic. Mm-hmm. We received almost 20,000 contacts in 2020.
Wow.
So for context, in 2021, see, I just saw this number this morning. What was it? 2021, I believe it was 2,300. So 20,000 versus 20. So it was an anomaly for sure. We struggled with the capacity to sort through all that. We actually got some pro bono assistance from Microsoft to do a little bit of work there. We did our best with what we had. We feel like we got every investigation and complaint that was there.
Wow.
Yeah, 147 investigations resulted from those complaints, just about from the protests. Yes, sir.
If I were a policeman, I would think I'd be held to an account by persons who are not a policeman. I'm not a policeman, but if I were, I would be surprised that we would let you make a determination about my work as a policeman.
That's an astute observation, and we hear that frequently. And that's why we like the hybrid model, because we think the combination of civilian and sworn experiences makes for really important dialogue. Because both bring something to the table that the other doesn't have, or that there might be questions about. So there's always two sets of eyes at very minimum on every case. A police officer's eyes from our sergeants doing the investigations, and then a supervisor's or the civilian investigator's eyes as well. So it's very checks and balances, because that's a concern. But it's also important for non-police officers to be able to see from a civilian perspective what community members might think about their conduct. So it's not black or white, it's very gray. Does that help answer your question? As much as it can?
I might say that in a democracy, Dawn, you're going to have to answer to the people.
Yeah,
But if Donald Trump's president, if Donald Trump is our guy, you don't have to answer to anybody. You can do what you want. See, so it's because we're in a democracy that we have to answer to the people.
And a lot of people really want civilians to be in charge. And we've combined both sides. And I don't know where it will totally go in the future, but our office currently thinks having both sides present to bring together as a whole is important. Any other questions? You're the best audience I've ever had, actually, listening.